Hello, everybody. I'm Theo Black.
Sarah Black, you sound like you're starting a kids program. Hi, everybody.
I'm not. I'm a little out of it. I've been cooking this morning, so things were hot, and also I have a headache.
Oh no, we
Oh
have
no.
we're having Southern California weather changes here, so that makes for
Yeah,
headaches.
yeah, it does for those of us with allergies or sensitive systems. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Anyway, no one cares about that. The three people who are listening to this don't care about that.
we actually get a few more views on these, and by a few more, I mean from like single digits to like 10. But
Nice.
yeah.
There's that documentary we need to watch about the guy who's who made those movies on YouTube, and when you get into three digits, you know you're doing well or whatever.
Oh yeah. We do need to watch that.
Anyway, but what we're going to talk about is Survival of the Dead, which is the last of the Dead.
Yeah.
That Romero made. It's the last film he made before he died. Although I think he died sometime later, just no one would.
Well, yeah, so it came out in 2009 and he died in 2017.
Yeah.
I don't know the circumstances of his death. I'm not sure if it was just like he was done making movies or he was too ill for it or not. Who knows?
The circumstances of his death was that he was done making movies.
Yeah, that's the circumstance of his death. I mean, hey, my favorite director, Kurosawa, like literally died in the hospital writing screenplays. So
yeah, no, totally.
it's everybody choose. I mean, hey, everybody does their thing. Anyways, it is the last of the Romero Night of the Living Dead franchise movies. There is theoretically, I think, one that was in production. Maybe it's in production hell now. I don't know. It's on the list, but it's not released or anything.
So one thing I want to go over quickly, because I think it relates to something you mentioned, you showed me that you'd done, is I had another one of those like semantical arguments with my significant other where I think he was
fun.
He had a good point though that I wanted to bring up. So for a moment, let's step back and talk about zombies. Okay. So I'm like, hey, there's 28 Days Later. We were talking about some like Pontypool, the Crazies, so on. And he's like, well, 28 Days Later is infected people. And I'm like, this is a zombie movie. He's like, yeah, but it's not The Living Dead. And to my point, I was just trying to figure out what is and isn't a zombie movie. Like, and 28 Days Later is considered a zombie movie, regardless of the backstory of the zombies. However,
for sure,
I hadn't really thought about it in that, like, yeah, the Romero movies are all about people who die, and because they're almost like werewolves or vampires, where because of the circumstances of their death, they come back as the undead.
Right.
Whereas 28 Days Later, people are alive. They just get infected in a way that turns them, that gives them, they eat people. I mean, that's it.
It has been a long time since I saw this 28 Days Later. Yeah. But yes, this is actually, I think, technically the same as, no, The Walking Dead, they all die first. Yeah, okay, no, never mind.
And then there's the movie we're going to talk about later or next, which is Return of the Living Dead.
The Return of the Living Dead, but otherwise correct.
Where they actually come out of graves, which is not a thing that happens in any of these Romero films. No one comes out of a grave. It's just people who died.
Yeah.
We never see anyone come out of a grave.
I mean, yeah, we never see anyone.
It's just people who die become reanimated. So, yes. So that was something I hadn't really thought about. And then you had watched something on Haitian zombies and Romero zombies. Did that relate in any way to?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it actually brought up a point that, so I listened to the commentary of Romero and some of the other people who made it, producers, actors, whatever.
Night of the Living Dead.
On Night of the Living Dead. And they had specifically, and this is from 94, so it's been quite a while, 20 years before he passed and 26 years ago. Anyways, and he talked about how they called them ghouls. Like, they don't call them zombies in that movie.
Right.
Like, they later start calling them zombies because that's what everybody was calling them. But he was actually trying to make a distinction from zombies. And zombies at least it seems to, per this thing I watched, which is from, I think, the PBS Storied channel, I think is what it is on YouTube. I think it might also air on PBS. I don't know. I don't have cable or TV like that. Anyways, and it's about how, there's voodoo and vodou, and like voodoo is kind of like, I think, the westernized version of the word, and it's been kind of bastardized. And so I think vodou is how most of them say it. I watched the thing, researched this.
Being Haitian people.
Being Haitians or people who are Haitian adjacent, like not necessarily Haitian from Haitian, but might be like, I think they were interviewing somebody in Louisiana who was like Haitian American. And so there's more stuff that goes with that in the thing. But it was interesting to hear them talk about it. And they didn't mention the Romero zombies in that video, because then I watched the Romero one, and the Romero one was essentially like, these zombies are different than the Haitian zombies. They didn't have any of the, I guess they're witch doctors, I'm not sure what they're considered, talk about like what they think of the Romero zombies. There obviously is a lot of racism or prejudice or any number of things involved in all of this. But like the Romero zombies are essentially different from the Haitian zombies.
Are the Haitian zombies living dead? Are they infected?
Yeah.
Are they just...
They're living dead. As far as what I remember from that video, like Haitian zombies kind of come out of slavery and like The Walking Dead, as in, slaves who are, I mean, they're doing whatever they're doing as slaves, but it's, they've lost their soul because of the hardship and all that stuff. I mean, it's really icky, but that seemed to be where some of it came from, at least sort of. And again, this wasn't a very long video. I don't want to speak too much on like things because I don't know about it, but it was interesting, even just this little bit, because I've heard about it, because I knew that zombies came from, or at least that I knew something that the zombies came from Haitian, Vodou, I guess. And so it's interesting that like the Romero zombies, like they're basically, it's the idea, but it's like they're not connected in any other way. And so that might be its own problem in some sort of cultural appropriation way, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the kind of how I want to wrap this little thing up is I'm not a zombie person, really. This was kind of a lark that we picked this. Yeah. We kind of picked it for the social commentary, which there was actually less of than I expected on some level.
Yeah.
But as whenever you kind of deep dive into a particular topic, it's that thing again where like there's only 3 stories or 7 stories or 20 or whatever, but like there's infinite variation. So I like that we've watched a couple things outside of the Romero movies, because you start to see there's some within the Romero movies, but then, outside the Romero movies. And I guess next week is our last week. We're going to do another zombie movie or 2 next week, right?
Yeah, we're going to do another one. We should figure out what those are going to be, but
yeah, that you start to see what the different things you can do with kind of the same, how you can rearrange the same piece, a monster that eats people, apocalyptic dick, like
do they walk, do they run?
Right, but you can kind of, but you end up with something a little different every time, and the difference is, if you zoom out, the differences aren't that big, but when you zoom in and really look at it, they can be very, very different movies. And
of course, because Romero made these movies across 4 decades, basically, you even see how the decade they're made in influences the movies, and how it's sometimes, the zombies may not have changed a ton between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of Day of the Dead, but like how the characters interact with the zombies really changed. Some of that is also just the story, but there is something you can kind of read into it based on the decade these movies came out.
Yeah. So, Survival of the Dead. Do you want me to synopsize it?
Yeah, it's a reminder we're spoiling all the things.
That's so spoiling. So this takes place kind of after Diary. It definitely around the same time as Diary of the Dead, because there's an overlap of characters, and the main characters in Survival of the Dead are actually the National Guard, or the fake National Guard, or whatever that was, who robbed the people in Diary of the Dead. And basically the zombie apocalypse has happened. They're trying to figure out what to do, where to go, and they end up going to this island that's basically got 2 families on it that both have
Prune
Irish...
Island or something?
Plum Island.
Plum.
You're similar but different. And there's two families. There's the O'Flynn's and the Muldoons. I don't know why Irish people keep popping up. I have nothing against the Irish. It's just kind of funny.
It's kind of specific.
Kind of specific. And it's an island where, like, I feel like they're like the clans and the McClarys. They're like although I think those guys were together. But it's like two families warring over a hill kind of a situation.
Right.
And both sides have different ideas on how to deal with the zombies. And because they're on this island, it's kind of this very enclosed ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the National Guard people end up getting kind of caught up in it.
Yeah.
And I think I like this one more than you. I like this one more than Land or Diary. Do we want to talk? Should I go first? Do you want to talk about the good or the bad first?
You go ahead.
So let's talk about the bad first, which means I'm throwing it back at you because there's some really pretty colors, but this film looks really bad.
It looks really terrible. Like all three of these films are like I know that Romero wasn't like a big Hollywood director exactly, though I'm pretty sure he made some big films. I don't know, but like they're digital, but like they're not well color corrected or like they haven't I mean, sometimes with digital they'll do an effect to make it look like film, and I think film looks better. I mean, there are some digital like Red, I think, where it just looks really nice and necessarily, but like these didn't look very good.
Right. But I mean, more specifically, like I noticed that people's faces were being blasted with light in situations where it didn't make sense. Blasted with light.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the next thing is like the lighting in almost all three of these movies. Diary, it isn't as bad to me, but basically all three of these, the lighting is just terrible. Like they're like I think it's key lighting that you put on people's face, and they're like, here, we're gonna shine this giant key light into your face.
Yeah, and it's like night, and I appreciated that it was a colorful film because I get a little tired of
Land of the Dead was very brown.
Yeah, but the Land of the Dead is hardly the only sinner. I mean, I like Suspiria, which has like bright reds. You can have color and be horrifying. We don't need horror. Doesn't need to be. I understand, the unknown, putting things in the dark, that kind of thing, but it doesn't all need to be murky all the time. So I appreciated that, but and the framing, it felt very TV movie. It felt Sci-Fi Channel at times.
It's that weird thing where like Romero came from commercials, right? And in Dawn of the Dead, I didn't really notice it then. In Night of the Living Dead, you can kind of tell, like I watched a thing and because of that, I kind of understand like how coming from commercials informed what he did there. But then Dawn and Dead don't really feel like commercials or like they come from anywhere. But then Land, Diary is found footage, so it just looks like found footage.
Yeah.
It actually, of the three, it kind of looks better to me just because it's of the conceit, though the conceit doesn't work. Anyways, but then Survival, just like they're all it's like the frame, like there is a shot in Survival towards the end where it's our guys are handcuffed and sitting near these zombies, and then the villains are like over to the right, and like there are no close-ups, and like people are talking, and so sometimes usually you'll bring the audio up or down based on how far they are from the camera, so like there's all these tricks about how audio doesn't always match the what's in the frame, and like, but it just is weird because it sounds like he's right next to you, but you can't see who's talking.
Yeah.
Like like I know it's the old man, but I couldn't tell which one was the old man.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I was like, I kept throwing my arms up, like, what's happening? Give me a close up. I need something. This isn't a movie where you need to do this.
Well, and that's where you wonder if budget constraints or something. I mean, that doesn't excuse some of it, but I was watching a K-drama recently where it's like, I just want to know what happened because the production went downhill for like the last few episodes. And I think my guess is there was a time constraint there. And that's where you wonder, like, were they shooting those? You don't always shoot films linearly. In fact, you usually don't. But then, were they running out of time and they just got the shots they could get? I mean, that's like infamously why you get a lot of long shots with indie films, because they take a while to set up, but then you just, you've got your 5 minutes and you don't need to do like 10, 20 different setups or whatever. I'm not as hip on production. Anyway,
getting coverage is takes longer and is more expensive.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into why I liked it, and why I liked it more than the others is, to me, it felt more like a low budget horror film than the other two. Land felt like a knockoff of a wannabe blockbuster type thing. Diary felt like it was just chasing the Blair Witch trend. Survival of the Dead almost had what I wanted. I talked about last time, where now the zombies are here and it's kind of becoming normal. So what's a smaller thing that we're dealing with than, we're not dealing with, we haven't zoomed out the way you do in Land of the Dead and it's trying to do too much at once. And you're not just dealing with the initial breakout of zombies the way Diary does. So now, like, what's kind of an interesting problem we're dealing with? And one of the groups wants to see if they can kind of like tame the zombies, which goes back to kind of Day of the Dead, except they're not scientists. They're just people who are attached to these people. And I love the imagery of the zombies that were like tied up and just repeatedly doing tasks. Like, I thought that was great imagery. I love the zombie just riding around on a horse. Yeah. Like there was just riding on a horse.
Oh, and that does lead to a great reveal later, which is like,
which I kind of, it was schlocky, but it was fun, which is because you've been led to believe. So there you meet the daughters of one of these patriarchs. Let's just call them what they are.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of the movie, and then when you come. And then you leave the island for a while, and when you come back, she seems to have been turned into a zombie and riding around on her horse. But the reveal is, dun, dun, dun!
Twins!
There's two of them, and one of them's alive. One of them's alive, and one of them's a zombie.
Yeah.
But that's why I kind of enjoyed this movie, was schlocky stuff like that. Like, in a way, the zombie lore was kind of secondary. Like, these could have been ghouls. These almost could have been ghosts. Like, can we rehabilitate ghosts? Like, it didn't really matter that much that they were zombies. But also the movie moved. Like, we started in one place. We got on a ferry. We went through this. We ended up on the island. We went over here on the island. We did this. Like, I enjoy, and I understood what was happening. There was a kid. There was a Hispanic guy. There was a woman who is ethnically ambiguous. There's like grouchy bearded man. Like, we were back to being able to tell characters apart, which I hadn't felt for the last two movies. And they had minor characterization and minor arcs. And so for all those reasons, I enjoyed it. Would I recommend it casually to people I don't know that well? No, because it's still kind of cheap and silly. And
this is another one. Like, basically all three, Land, Diary, and this one are like, I'm not going to recommend it to anyone. Maybe Diary to like the right film fanatic, because they might appreciate the bullshit.
I would recommend Survival of the Dead to certain people.
But like, sure. I would recommend any of these three to horror fans, because like they all kind of have their thing. Like, but Diary is the only one I might step outside of horror fans and be like, well, but I mean, I could also see the same for Survival. I just wouldn't do it. I ultimately enjoyed Survival. I just had a few too many moments of like, this just like, things looking bad don't usually ruin a movie for me, and it didn't here. But like, it bothers me more than it bothers you. Like, where I'm just like watching this and I'm like, here's a shot. Like, plus do you remember that kid asking that woman, like, what would you do with $1 million? Nothing ever comes of that. Like,
it's almost like he's trying to legitimize the money in Land of the Dead, where it's like, no, really, money is important. That's why I made Land of the Dead. And it's like, it's not, though.
No, it's not important. And then there's also that thing with the hanging zombie and our guy, but we never get a payoff for that. So like, they ran out, like you said, maybe they ran out of money. There's just a few too many of those for me, where I'm like, it's that level of thing where like, I think I almost, like, if it wasn't for the amount of annoyment I got from those few moments, I'd probably like it the way you did. But those bits of annoyment, like, shunt it down for me.
I like that annoyment. Anointment.
It's anointment. You put it. It's like
totally
an ointment that you put on your skin, but it goes in your brain.
But it makes you itch. It just makes you itch. It's an anointment. So no, and I mean, you tease me, and I'm novelizing it, that I like I just don't like mass appeal, big budget stuff, which is unfair because sometimes I do. But if you look at it, Land of the Dead is basically like the wannabe.
Yeah, totally.
One. And so, of course, I don't like that one as much as like this weird little thing. I agree with you, but what makes, and you know, some of it's like by comparison. Like, I'm not comparing Survival of the Dead to, you know, Citizen Kane.
Right.
But there's ideas, like there are ideas in it, like, you know, these two families that have different opinions on how to deal with the zombies. Like, can we get them to eat food? Should we just shoot them? Like, you know, where do you go? You know, there's zombies in the water that are just standing there grabbing at people. You know, there's none of this kind of like, well, you know, in Simon Baker character being shocked that he has to shoot someone for turning into a zombie. Like, we're not rehashing that stuff again. Yeah. And that's what elevated it for me.
I think I'd agree too.
You can only elevate something like this so far.
Yeah, and like ultimately, like the Romero thing that I watched, you know, that it did make me appreciate Land and Diary and Survival a little more. But and I mean, it wasn't like about the quality of them. It was more about, you know, where, you know, just zombies and kind of what it did for zombies. It's this weird thing where, like, in retrospect, I realized like Land of the Dead feels like a ripoff of, you know, 28 Days Later or something, which I think came before it by a few years or something. But it doesn't even matter, because the other thing is Land of the Dead feels like a ripoff of The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead wasn't out. It came out in the 2010s somewhere. Yeah. Yet Land of the Dead feels like a ripoff of something that came later. Like, it just doesn't. And so Survival to me doesn't fall into the same thing as Land or Diary do, even though I like Diary more, where those feel like ripoffs of things. Survival feels like a low budget zombie movie that gets influences from anything, but doesn't feel as directly a ripoff of something as the other two.
Yeah, and it's also Survival. I mean, it's still an amalgam of other things.
Totally. It just doesn't feel like a ripoff.
It's a Western, and it falls into my bucket where I like Westerns that aren't Westerns. So I kind of like it. So it's still, you know, it's still a bunch of other stuff. It just is. And also, there doesn't seem to be, I guess, what's the social commentary there? I mean, I guess, I feel like he was shoehorning it in a little less. Now, he shoehorned in other stuff like that horrific.
Well, it's the social commentary is like, you know, even in, you know, it's the two families that died, they're still warring at the end of the film with their empty pistols or whatever. And so it's like, it's a commentary on, like, you know, human conflict and hereditary conflict, maybe, where, like, you know, it's, you know, why, you know, we're X number of years removed from things, but
also that we're doomed to just endlessly repeat, which is kind of what the zombies themselves are doing.
Pretty much, yeah. And so it's like, there's something, I think Land is the worst because Romero's trying to do something big, and at least in the franchise that we've watched, he's not good at doing that. Diary is better because it's smaller to me, and he's doing something smaller. It's still, I mean, these are movies that have tons of issues. And then Survival is also better because he's doing something smaller, lower budget. Like, it's still better than Land, you know? So. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say, I think we're kind of wrapping. There's not a lot more to say about Survival. I think for my personal taste, as far as not what I think is the best, but what would I rewatch, in what order? I would rewatch Dawn of the Dead, and then I struggled with Night of the Living Dead. I think it is a better film than Day or Survival, but those might actually come first before Night of the Living Dead, and then Diary, and then Land of the Dead. I keep having Living Dead, but that we'll talk about that later. But I do think Night of the Living Dead is significantly better than Survival or Day. I just found it really boring in places and had trouble watching it.
My rewatch list is pretty similar. Like Dawn is, the one that I also would rewatch and, enjoyed the most. Then comes Night of the Living Dead. I might go for, it depends, like anything, but I feel like I might actually like the odd historical movies that like are interesting for society sometimes more than you. Like
Yeah.
I don't know why, but like I can't imagine, like I don't know if have you ever seen Metropolis? You have it, right?
I don't think I have. No.
Like I can't imagine you really enjoying it that much, but maybe you should see it because it's just one of those movies. But like I enjoyed it, so like it's one of those things. But then it'd probably be like Dawn I'd rewatch, and then like probably Night of the Living Dead, maybe Diary of the Dead because I have like a specific thing about it that I like. It works in my brain, and then like after that is probably like Day and Survival, and then Land. Like I'm probably more likely to watch Day than I am, I might even be more likely to watch that than Survival or not Survival Diary, just because I want to see if like there's something more to it that I didn't quite get. But it's interesting having done this whole series, and like it's interesting to have seen like I still have this. George Romero changed, like he basically started a trend and a craze in movies. Like I don't know that Night of the Living Dead is the first zombie movie, but it certainly is like the launch point for a whole genre. And then it gets reinvented later by other people, and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead really contribute to the genre. And then he becomes not like a hack or anything exactly, but like he's ripping off other movies that came from stuff that he made. Like, which is interesting to me, especially because like I like Kurosawa movies, and like Kurosawa made movies, the feudal Japan movies of some kind, some era, kind of because he liked John Ford movies, and he used that influence, not because of, but he used the influence of Ford movies to like inform how he did his films. And then those movies got remade by, Sergio Leone, and those influenced way later Westerns. So it's like, it's that thing where it's like Romero influences this genre, other people come in and make things. And then a few years later, Romero comes in and makes weird like knockoffs of a genre that he like helped start, It's a fascinating kind of look, and the social commentary, unintentional or otherwise, it really, it does like, he cast Dwayne Jones as the lead in Night of the Living Dead. And by the last movie, I don't remember, like there's Tomboy and she's of mixed ethnicity, but like we've lost our main character as a black man, and that's fine. Not every movie has to have that or anything, but like weirdly, he's almost regressed into like what he kind of, like unintentionally, I guess he did. So it's like, there's something worth studying there, probably already, I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of books on these already, but it's kind of a fascinating movie culture thing.
I agree. I in a way, it'll be interesting at some point if we do one of the other horror series. Yeah. This one's though kind of unique, I think, because Romero directs them all. I'm not sure how often that happens. And I know Carpenter was out after 2 on Halloween. Or no, he did up to the 3rd.
Did he do the 3rd? Yeah. It is unique in that it's Romero who did it.
Yeah.
There are 2 remakes, and maybe we watch those next week. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But like those, you're right. Because Romero made these, and he also made them. I mean, they span the 60s, late 60s to late 2000s. So that's what,
Whereas I think a lot of the iconic horror genres we think of started in the late 70s at the earliest. And a lot of them started in the 80s. So
there's not as many from as early as the 60s. You're right, that I can think of.
Not unless we're talking stuff like Frankenstein, which is, goes all the way back to Mary Shelley. So
which is a little different. Anyways,